Hegel remarks somewhere that all the events and personalities of great importance in world history occur, as it were, twice. He forgot to add, the first time is tragedy, the second is farce. Costadier for Danton, Louis Blanc for Robespierre, the Montaigne of 1848-51 for the Montaigne of 1793-95, the nephew for the uncle. And the same caricature occurs in the circumstances attending the second edition of the 18th Brumaire. Men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under given circumstances, directly encountered and inherited from the past. The traditions of all the generations of the dead weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. And just when they seem involved in revolutionizing themselves and things, in creating something that has never before existed, it is precisely in such periods of revolutionary crisis that they anxiously conjure up the spirits of the past to their service and borrow names, battle cries, and costumes from them in order to act out the new scene of world history in this time-honored disguise and this borrowed language. Thus, Luther donned the mask of the Apostle Paul. The revolution of 1789 to 1814 draped itself alternately as the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, and the revolution of 1848 could do nothing better than to parody 1789 one minute and the revolutionary tradition of 1793 to 95 the next. In a similar way, a beginner who has learned a new language always translates it back into his mother tongue, but he has assimilated the spirit of the new language and can freely express himself in it only when he can use it without recalling the old, and forgets his native tongue in the use of the new. If we consider this conjuring up of the dead of world history, a salient difference is revealed immediately. Camille Desmoulins, Danton, Robespierre, Saint-Just, Napoleon, the heroes as well as the parties and masses of the old French Revolution performed the task of their time in Roman costume and with Roman phrases, the task of unchaining and setting up modern bourgeois society. The first ones smashed the feudal basis to pieces and mowed down the feudal heads which had grown on it. The other created inside France the only conditions under which free competition could be developed, parceled landed property exploited, and the unchained industrial productive power of the nation employed. And everywhere beyond the French borders, he swept the feudal institutions away to the extent necessary to provide bourgeois society in France with a suitable up-to-date environment on the European continent. Once the new social formation was established, the antediluvian colossi disappeared, and along with them, the resurrected Romanity. The Brutuses, Gracchi, Publicolas, the tribunes, the senators, and Caesar himself. Bourgeois society in its sober reality had begotten its true interpreters and mouthpieces in Essays, Cousins, Royer-Collards, Benjamin Constants, and Guizot's. Its real military leaders sat behind the office desks, and the hog-headed Louis XVIII was its political chief. Wholly absorbed in the production of wealth and in the peaceful struggle of competition, it is no longer comprehended that the ghosts of Roman times had watched over its cradle. But unheroic as bourgeois society is, it nevertheless took heroism, sacrifice, terror, civil war, and the battles of nations to bring it into being. And in the classically austere traditions of the Roman Republic, its gladiators found the ideals and the art forms, the self-deceptions that they needed in order to conceal from themselves the bourgeois limitations of the content of their struggles, and to keep their zeal on the high plane of the great historical tragedy. Similarly, at another stage of development a century earlier, Cromwell and the English people had borrowed speech, passions, and illusions from the Old Testament for their bourgeois revolution. When the real aim had been achieved, when the bourgeois transformation of English society had been accomplished, Locke supplanted Habakkuk. Thus, the awakening of the dead in those revolutions served the purpose of glorifying the new struggles, not of parodying the old, of magnifying the given task in the imagination, not of fleeing from its solution in reality, of finding the spirit of revolution once more, not of making its ghost walk about again. From 1848 to 1851, only the ghosts of the old revolution walked about, from Marrast, the Republican, and Gaunt Jaune, who disguised himself as the Old Bailey, down to the adventurer who hides his commonplace repulsive features under the Iron Death mask of Napoleon. An entire people which had imagined that by means of a revolution it had imparted to itself an accelerated power of motion, suddenly finds itself set back into a defunct epoch. And in order that no doubt as to the relapse may be possible, the old dates rise again. The old chronology, the old names, the old edicts which had long become a subject of antiquarian erudition, and the old minions of the law who had seemed long decayed. The nation feels like that mad Englishman in Bedlam, who fancies that he lives in the time of the ancient pharaohs and daily bemoans the hard labor that he must perform in the Ethiopian mines as a gold digger. Immured in his subterranean prison, a dimly burning lamp fastened to his head, the overseer of the slaves behind him with a long whip, and at the exits, a confused welter of barbarian mercenaries who understand neither the forced laborers in the mines nor one another, since they speak no common language. And all this is expected of me, sighs the mad Englishman, of me, a free-born Briton, in order to make gold for the old pharaohs. In order to pay the debts of the Bonaparte family, sighs the French nation. The Englishman, so long as he was in his right mind, could not get rid of his fixation on making gold. The French, so long as they were engaged in revolution, could not get rid of the memory of Napoleon, as the election of December 10th proved. They hankered to return from the perils of revolution to the flesh pots of Egypt, and December 2nd, 1851 was the answer. They have not only a caricature of the old Napoleon, they have caricatured the old Napoleon himself, as he must appear in the middle of the 19th century. The social revolution of the 19th century cannot draw its poetry from the past, but only from the future. It cannot begin with itself before it has stripped off all superstition with regards to the past. Earlier revolutions required recollections of past world history in order to drug themselves against their own content. In order to arrive at its own content, the revolution of the 19th century must let the dead bury their dead. Then the words went beyond the content. Now, the content goes beyond the words. The February Revolution was a surprise attack, a taking of the old society unawares, and the people proclaimed this unexpected stroke as a deed of world importance, ushering in a new epoch. On December 2nd, the February Revolution is conjured away by a card sharper's trick, and what seems overthrown is no longer the monarchy, but the liberal concessions that were wrung from it by a century of struggle. Instead of society having conquered a new content for itself, it seems that the state only returned to its oldest form, to the shamelessly simple domination of the saber and the cowl. Such is the reply of the coup d'etat of December 1851 to the coup de main of February 1848. Easy come, easy go. Meanwhile, time had not been entirely wasted. During the years 1848 to 51, French society has made up for the studies and experiences, albeit by a method which is condensed because it is revolutionary, which, in a regular, so to speak, textbook course of development, should have preceded the February Revolution if it was to be more than a ruffling of the surface. Society now seems to have fallen back behind its point of departure. It has, in truth, first to create for itself the revolutionary point of departure, the situation, the relations, the conditions under which alone modern revolution becomes serious. Bourgeois revolutions, like those of the 18th century, storm swiftly from success to success. Their dramatic effects outdo each other. Men and things seem set in sparkling brilliance. Ecstasy is the everyday spirit. But they are short-lived soon as they have attained their zenith. And a long, crapulent depression lays hold of society before it learns to soberly assimilate the results of its storm and stress period. On the other hand, proletarian revolutions, like those of the 19th century, criticize themselves constantly, interrupt themselves continually in their own course, come back to the apparently accomplished in order to begin it afresh, deride with unmerciful thoroughness the inadequacies, weaknesses, and paltriness of their first attempts, seem to throw down their adversary only in order that he may draw new strength from the earth and rise before them again, even more gigantic, recoil ever and anon from the indefinite prodigiousness of their own aims, until a situation has been created which makes all turning back impossible, and the conditions themselves cry out, Hic Rhodus, hic salta. Here is the rose, here dance. For the rest, every fairly competent observer, even if he had not followed the course of French development step by step, must have had a presentiment that an unheard of fiasco was in store for the revolution. It was enough to hear the self-complacent howl of victory with which Messieurs the Democrats congratulated each other on the expected favorable consequences of the second Sunday in May 1852. In their minds, the second Sunday in May 1852 had become a fixed idea, a dogma, like the day on which Christ should reappear and the millennium begin in the minds of the Chiliasts. As ever, weakness had taken refuge in a belief in miracles, fancied the enemy overcome when he was only conjured away in the imagination, and it lost all understanding of the present in a passive glorification of a future that was in store and of the deeds it had in petto, but which it merely did not want to carry out as yet. Those heroes who seek to disprove their demonstrated incompetence by offering each other their sympathy and by ganging together had tied up their bundles, collected their laurel wreaths in advance, and were just then engaged on the exchange market in discounting the Republic's in partibus, for which they had already providently organized the government personnel with all the calm of their unassuming disposition. December 2nd struck them like a thunderbolt from the blue, and the peoples, who in periods of pusillanimous depression gladly let their apprehension be drowned by the loudest bawlers, will perchance have convinced themselves that the times are past when the cackle of geese could save the capital. The Constitution, the National Assembly, the dynastic parties, the blue and red Republicans, the heroes of Africa, the thunder from the platform, the sheet lightning of the daily press, the entire literature, the political names and the intellectual reputations, the civil law and the penal code, the liberté, égalité, fraternité, and the second Sunday in May 1852, all has vanished like a phantasmagoria before the spell of a man whom even his enemies do not make out to be a sorcerer. Universal suffrage seems to have survived only for a moment, in order that with its own hand it may make its last will and testament for all the world to see, and declare in the name of the people itself, all that exists deserves to perish. It is not enough to say, as the French do, that their nation was taken unawares. A nation and a woman are not forgiven the unguarded hour in which the first adventurer that came along could violate them. The riddle is not solved by such turns of speech, but merely formulated differently. It remains to be explained how a nation of 36 millions can be surprised and delivered unresisting into captivity by 3 swindlers. Let us briefly retrace the phases that the French Revolution went through from February 24th, 1848 to December 1851. 3 main periods are unmistakable. The February period, May 4th, 1848 to May 28th, 1849, the period of the Constitution of the Republic, or of the Constituent National Assembly. May 28th, 1849 to December 2nd, 1851, the period of the Constitutional Republic, or of the Legislative National Assembly. The first period, from February 24th, or the overthrow of Louis Philippe, to May 4th, 1848, the meeting of the Constituent Assembly, the February period proper, may be described as the prologue to the revolution. Its character was officially expressed in the fact that the government improvised by itself declared that it was provisional, and like the government, everything that was mooted, attempted, or enunciated during this period proclaimed itself to be only provisional. Nothing and nobody ventured to lay claim to the right of existence and of concrete action. All the elements that had prepared or determined the revolution, the dynastic opposition, the Republican bourgeoisie, the Democratic Republican petty bourgeoisie, and the Social Democratic workers, provisionally found their place in the February government. It could not be otherwise. The February days originally intended an electoral reform by which the circle of the politically privileged among the propertied class itself was to be widened and the exclusive domination of the financial aristocracy overthrown. When it came to the actual conflict, however, When the people mounted the barricades, the National Guard remained passive, the army offered no serious resistance, and the monarchy ran away. The Republic appeared to be a matter of course. Every party construed it in its own way. Having secured it arms in hand, the proletariat impressed its stamp upon it and proclaimed it to be a social republic. In this way, the general content of the modern revolution was indicated, a content which was in the strangest contradiction to everything that, with the material available, with the degree of education attained by the masses, under the given circumstances and relations, could be immediately realized in practice. On the other hand, the claims of all the remaining elements that had collaborated in the February Revolution were recognized by the lion's share that they obtained in the government. In no period do we, therefore, find a more confused mixture of high-flown phrases and actual uncertainty and clumsiness, of more enthusiastic striving for innovation and more deeply rooted domination of the old routine, of more apparent harmony of the whole society, and more profound alienation of its elements. While the Paris proletariat still reveled in the vision of the wide vistas that had opened before it, and indulged in earnest discussions on social problems, the old powers of society had grouped themselves, assembled, reflected, and found unexpected support in the mass of the nation, the peasants and petty bourgeois, who all at once stormed onto the political stage after the barriers of the July monarchy had fallen. The second period, from May 4th, 1848 to the end of May 1849, is the period of the Constitution, the foundation of the bourgeois republic. Immediately after the February days, not only had the dynastic opposition been surprised by the Republicans, and the Republicans by the Socialists, but all France by Paris. The National Assembly, which met on May 4th, 1848, had emerged from the national elections and represented the nation. It was a living protest against the pretensions of the February days and was to reduce the results of the revolution to the bourgeois scale. In vain, the Paris proletariat, which immediately grasped the character of this National Assembly, attempted on May 15th, a few days after it met, to forcibly negate its existence, to dissolve it, to disintegrate again into its constituent parts, the organic form in which the proletariat was threatened by the reacting spirit of the nation. As everybody knows, the only result of May 15th was the removal of Blanqui and his comrades. That is, of the real leaders of the Proletarian Party from the public stage for the entire duration of the cycle we are considering. The bourgeois monarchy of Louis-Philippe can only be followed by a bourgeois republic. That is to say, whereas a limited section of the bourgeoisie ruled in the name of the king, the whole of the bourgeoisie will now rule in the name of the people. The demands of the Paris proletariat are utopian nonsense, to which an end must be put. The Paris proletariat replied to this declaration of the Constituent National Assembly with the June insurrection, the most colossal event in the history of European civil wars. The bourgeois republic triumphed. On its side stood the financial aristocracy, the industrial bourgeoisie, the middle class, the petty bourgeoisie, the army, the lumpen proletariat organized as the mobile guard, the intellectual elites, the clergy, and the rural population. On the side of the Paris proletariat stood none but itself. More than 3,000 insurgents were butchered after the victory, and 15,000 were deported without trial. With this defeat, the proletariat passes into the background of the revolutionary stage. It attempts to press forward again on every occasion, as soon as the movement appears to make a fresh start, but with ever decreased expenditure of strength and always slighter results. As soon as one of the social strata situated above it gets into revolutionary ferment, the proletariat enters into an alliance with it, and so shares all the defeats that the different parties suffer, one after another. But these subsequent blows become the weaker, the greater the surface of society over which they are distributed. The more important leaders of the proletariat in the assembly and in the press successively fall victim to the courts, and ever more equivocal figures come to head it. Part of the proletariat throws itself into doctrinaire experiments, exchange banks, and workers' associations, hence into a movement in which it renounces the revolutionizing of the old world by means of the latter's own great combined resources and seeks rather to achieve its salvation behind society's back, in private fashion, within its limited conditions of existence, and hence necessarily suffers shipwreck. It seems unable either to rediscover revolutionary greatness in itself or to gain renewed energy from recently formed alliance until all classes with which it contended in June themselves lie prostrate beside it. But at least it succumbs with the honors of the great world historic struggle. Not only France, but all Europe trembles at the June earthquake, while the ensuing defeats of the upper classes are so cheaply bought that they require barefaced exaggeration by the victorious party to be able to pass for events at all, and become the more ignominious the further the defeated party is removed from the proletariat. The defeat of the June insurgents, to be sure, had now prepared and leveled the ground on which the bourgeois republic could be founded and built up. But it had shown at the same time that in Europe the questions at issue are other than that of republic or monarchy. It had revealed that here, bourgeois republic signifies the unlimited despotism of one class over other classes. It had proved that in countries with an old civilization, with a developed formation of classes, with modern conditions of production, and with an intellectual consciousness in which all traditional ideas have been dissolved by the work of centuries, the republic signifies in general only the political form of revolution of bourgeois society, and not its conservative form of life, as for example in the United States of North America, where, though classes already exist, they have not yet become fixed, but continually change and interchange their elements in constant flux, where the modern means of production, instead of coinciding with a stagnant surplus population, rather compensate for the relative deficiency of heads and hands, and where, finally, the feverish, youthful movement of material production, which has to make a new world its own, has left neither time nor opportunity for abolishing the old spirit world. During the June days, all classes and parties had unified in the party of order, against the proletarian class as the party of anarchy, of socialism, of communism. They had saved society from the enemies of society. They had given out the watchwords of the old society, property, family, religion, order, to their army as passwords, and had proclaimed to the counter-revolutionary crusaders, "In this sign thou shalt conquer." From that moment, as soon as one of the numerous parties which had gathered under this sign against the June insurgents seeks to hold the revolutionary battlefield in its own class interest, it goes down before the cry, property, family, religion, order. Society is saved just as often as the circle of its rulers contracts, as a more exclusive interest is maintained against a wider one. Every demand of the simplest bourgeois financial reform, of the most ordinary liberalism, of the most formal republicanism, of the most shallow democracy, is simultaneously castigated as an attempt on society and branded as socialism. And finally, the high priests of religion and order themselves are driven with kicks from their Pythian tripods, hauled out of their beds in the darkness of the night, bundled into prison vans, thrown into dungeons or sent into exile. Their temple is razed to the ground, their mouths are sealed, their pens broken, their law torn to pieces in the name of religion, of property, of the family, of order. Bourgeois fanatics for order are shot down on their balconies by mobs of drunken soldiers, their domestic sanctuaries profaned, their houses bombarded for amusement in the name of property, of the family, of religion, and of order. Finally, the scum of bourgeois society forms the holy phalanx of order, and the hero Krapolinski installs himself in the Tuileries as the savior of society.